Um, we are about to get started. Welcome to the live stream for People Always Pay. It's so good to see you all. We'll get started here in just a second. I see folks rolling in, so we'll give it just a second. We will be recording tonight, so we'll make that available to folks. Welcome, Gina. It's great to see you. Margie, Peter, love for you all to be here tonight. We'll get started here in just a second. We got a great lineup of speakers, so welcome. We'll give just a minute here. Yeah, and if you can, just drop your name and where you're calling in from in the chat box. We'd love to see you. All right, let's get started. Welcome. The International Monetary Fund reports that in 2022, governments around the world gave the fossil fuel industry $7 million in subsidies. $7 trillion in subsidies. Imagine if governments invested that much money in the clean energy campaign, or addressing issues like housing or healthcare or education or local infrastructure. Imagine if the government invested in your lives and watched out for your family interests like they do the fossil fuel industry. The IMF talks about that $7 trillion like it's government money, some abstract pot of cash that appeared out of thin air. But that's your money. We, the people, fund our governments. That is our money the government uses to subsidize fossil fuel companies. So it's more accurate to say that we, the people, are subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. And it's even more accurate to say that we are subsidizing fossil fuel industry to pollute our air and our water, to make us sick, to destroy our environment and wreck our climate. We're here tonight to talk about tax abatements, a form of government subsidies that states like Texas and Louisiana give to LNG exporters operating in the Gulf of Mexico. In December, our Sierra Club team and several other frontline organizations along the Gulf of Mexico published a report, People Always Pay, detailing the tax abatement programs that Texas and Louisiana have given to wealthy fossil fuel companies that are liquefying gas and then selling it around the world. Over the past few years, we've been talking a lot about and studying the impacts that LNG is having on frontline communities. And last year, Sierra Club and Greenpeace USA published Permit to Kill, a report detailing the health impacts that industry has on frontline families. Sadly, these impacts can be measured in part by premature deaths due to exposure to air pollution. Sierra Club has also published reports on increased energy costs caused by exporting LNG, findings which were substantiated by the Department of Energy's recent LNG studies. Companies and the politicians that support them justify these impacts, as well as the tax breaks they get, by arguing that the plants provide jobs and economic benefits. They argue that these benefits are so substantial that companies shouldn't have to pay taxes. But the numbers and data just don't support those arguments. And as you'll hear in a few minutes, the reality is that LNG exports, like other fossil fuel industries, are all cost and no benefit for our families and communities. We're a month into this new presidential administration. They're extremely pro-LNG and pro-fossil fuel. And why wouldn't they be? Industry donated over $450 million to the Trump campaign, and they're getting their money's worth. It's hard to keep up with all the chaos coming out of Washington right now, but it's important for people to stick together. I think we all heard that the elections were about kitchen table issues, the economy and inflation. Tax abatements and these massive giveaways to fossil fuel companies directly impact your quality of life and the struggles we talk about at home. Our speakers tonight are James Hyatt, Becca Hinojosa, Allison Kirsch, and Claire Dorner. We'll start with James, who argues that the streets of Cameron, Louisiana should be paved in gold by now. Then we'll hear from the brilliant and awesome Allison Kirsch, who led the team and put this report together. Then we'll hear from Becca Hinojosa, who's the OG LNG campaigner, who deploys a death by 1,000 cuts strategy to protect her community from the LNG buildout. Becca's taken on powerful fossil fuel companies lobbied banks and foreign energy companies, and has been fighting Elon Musk since he was just a billionaire car guy talking about Mars. Then we're going to hear from Claire, who leads a lot of the Sierra Club's work fighting LNG on Capitol Hill. At the end of the presentations, we'll have times for Q&A, so please drop your questions in the chat box of the platform you're tuning in from. We'll keep track of those and get to as many as we can. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my good friend, James Hyatt. He's a lifelong resident of Lake Charles, Louisiana, former industry worker who knows all sides of these issues. James is founder and director of For a Better Bayou, and is really influential in all of our work and was very helpful in putting this report together. So James, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who has taken time out of their evenings to join us on this live stream. Before I really dive in, I want to invite everybody to take a deep breath wherever you're at. Just feel the air in your lungs and exhale. You know, this has been going on from the moment that we've been born. We've been breathing, and we don't often take the time to recognize that we are fighting multi-billion-dollar industry who's trying to take away clean air and clean water in the pursuit of profits and profits alone. This has been going on long before LNG was a thing being built here back in 1930s. Louisiana passed this industry tax exemption program, and many other states have programs similar that try to lure in companies to come and invest and provide jobs. That's what their call always is. It's about the economy, stupid. It's about jobs. What is tied to that is also premature death and suffering attached to continued dependency on fossil fuels. And I'm no stranger to that. My grandfather retired from a pipeline company. My father retired from a refinery. And I spent over a decade working in a refinery. Just today, I learned that the refinery I worked at actually was fined or is reaching a settlement with our Department of Environmental Quality for over 4 years of violations, including a 600-pound benzene release, a floating roof that sank into the tank and released over 10,000 pounds of VOCs into the air. And the amount of the fine was $160,000. That company has been operating here since 1944, has enjoyed tax exemptions for nearly 80 years to the tunes of millions of dollars every year. That is compounded by this build out of LNG that we have been seeing along the Gulf Coast. Southwest Louisiana is home to 3 of the nation's export terminals that are already operating. And those 3 together are exempted nearly $1 billion a year in property taxes. They're all located in the parish of Cameron, which is right on the Gulf Coast, a parish that has been hit by hurricanes and storms over and over again. What we have seen is that these companies like to do PR stunts where they will partner with education, with schools. They will give out $20,000 here, maybe $100,000 there, and to win the goodwill of the people and the community. It doesn't make up for the premature death or the suffering caused by carcinogens being pumped, legally permitted emissions being pumped into the air that affect the lives and livelihoods of so many people. This place is a sportsman's paradise. We live in a place of abundance. Creator has set us up for success, and we have continually flaunted that and worked against it. These companies, these fossil fuel companies, who receive billions of dollars in tax exemptions, will replant some marsh, 20 acres here, 100 acres there, while they destroy thousands and thousands of acres. One of the companies that just recently came here was Venture Global, Calcasieu Pass. This is a massive liquefied natural gas export terminal that takes fracked gas from the Permian Basin, liquefies it, supercools it to minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit, puts it on ships, and those ships are sold to the highest bidder in other countries. It drives up the cost of every American's bill. I mean, the electricity that's generated with natural gas, fertilizer that increases the price of food, all of that is tied to this export, this continued export of our natural resources. That has also led us down this path of the only thing we can do is fossil fuels, which is a narrative that is absolutely false. It seems like the way forward has got to take into account what has been unaccounted for: the lives lost, the premature death, the ecological collapse, the suffering of the people who live alongside and near these facilities that the taxpayers are subsidizing. Venture Global has only been operating for 3 years. We've seen reports that they have amassed over $18 billion in profits. That company alone is exempted from $180 million. These are just big numbers. It doesn't mean much to you unless you understand that the parish of Cameron, the entire budget is less than $60 million a year, in a place where the insurance cost has gone from $1,600 a year to $16,000 for a 2,000 square foot home. It's important to understand that the way that these companies have gotten over on all of us is that people feel helpless. And that is the farthest thing from the truth. When people come together and use their voice, it's been said, Reverend Yearwood has said this, and I will echo it forever. Organized people beat organized money every time. And what we need is for people from all over to get off the sidelines and to become active. And maybe you're one of those people. Maybe you do have a continued conversation with your elected representatives. That is the way forward, to find ways that we can be together as community is the solution to the problems. I just wanted to also say that we are at a turning point. We are seeing that corporate money, moneyed interest, is completely looting all the goods that are available for the people. The people government is looting from the people and giving more money into already overstuffed pockets. Here locally, we have 3 national wildlife refuges that are maintained by a staff of federal employees who 25% of them were just laid off. Do you know what $1 billion a year could do in a parish that the entire budget is $50 million? They could self-fund their own insurance and no longer be susceptible to these high gouging prices of premiums. The teachers could be adequately paid. The roads should be paved with gold. Maybe we wouldn't do that, but at least we wouldn't have so many potholes. The fishing, the recreational facilities would be plentiful. The seafood advisory that's issued for our river that tells us that we should not eat more than 2 meals a month of fish could be mitigated. We could clean up what these polluters have done if we would come together and demand that the taxes that are rightly owed to the people by corporate interest are paid. It's only the polluters that get tax exemptions like this. If you own some other industry, or I know some car dealers who have a couple hundred employees, you don't get a tax exemption. You only get the tax exemption if you have pollution attached to it. And and in a time when the climate is clearly changing, it's clearly our fault for extracting carbon from underground continually and adding it to the atmosphere. It's time to wake up and change things, and to not allow multi-billion-dollar companies to continue to extract lives and money from community here in Southwest Louisiana. And with that, I will stop. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Thank you, James. Ori, always appreciate your words and your grounding us. Thank you for sharing your story. I'm going to turn it over now to Allison, who is really kind of the herder of cats when it comes to this report. Allison is our senior energy campaigns analysis for the Sierra Club, and she's one of the smart people who helps us understand the economics and science behind our fight, and keeps us really well informed about these issues. So, Allison, I'll turn it over to you to run through the report. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Roddy, and thanks, James, for setting out the context. If we could go to the next slide, you'll see the cover of the report that we're talking about that we publish with Roddy, with Becca, who's going to speak later, with other organizations, including some that I've seen on this call, where we really dig into the tax breaks granted to the LNG industry in particular in Louisiana and Texas. And of course, we know that these states grant subsidies to not just LNG companies, but other polluters, as James said. We're going to look at specifically what that means for LNG for the moment. So if we go to the next slide, just to situate us, we might call them tax abatements, we might call them tax exemptions, tax breaks, but what we're really talking about is, as I've said, a form of a subsidy that the government is giving to a company by reducing the amount of taxes that that company owes. They could be local taxes, state taxes, property taxes. These come in different flavors. Next slide, just to continue setting a bit of context about what we looked at here. At a high level, we found, as James said, that Texas and Louisiana give the export industry of liquefied methane gas billions of dollars in tax breaks. And this is an industry that we know is building polluting terminals in communities that are already marginalized, typically heavily industrialized along the Gulf Coast, so that this gas can be exported overseas and used by customers abroad. And the report really is founded on interviews with people like James and Becca and other community members that are impacted by these existing and proposed terminals around the coast, to see, how could this funding be better used? How could those streets be paved with gold, or at the very least paved? And so while I'm going to get into the numbers a bit, I definitely encourage, if you look at the report, you'll see there's a lot of stories there about and ideas about how tax revenues could be spent if they weren't, if companies were paying their fair share. Next slide. So let's start with Louisiana. These are two maps of two of the biggest hotspots of proposed and operating terminals in Louisiana. The map on the left is the area that James was talking about in Southwest Louisiana, Calcasieu and Cameron parishes. You can see this is really just a huge concentration of proposed and operating terminals. And it was the location of the first LNG exports out of the United States back almost a decade ago. We also looked at Plaquemines Parish on the east side of the state, which you can see is really situated in like the swampy, wetland, hurricane-prone area on the coast there, and has, one terminal coming online right now and a few others proposed. Next slide. So we looked at two different programs in Louisiana, but we're going to focus on the one that is the most generous, and truly, like across the country, it's one of the most generous programs for corporate subsidies, which is the Industrial Tax Abatement Program, or ITAP. And what this program does is it lets industrial companies off the hook from property taxes if they build manufacturing facilities in Louisiana for up to 10 years, and those giveaways start when the projects come online. So Together Louisiana, an allied coalition of groups, found that in 2023, across the entire state and across all industries, of nearly $149 billion worth of property was exempt from paying taxes in the state. And the rules of this program and like what's exactly required and how much of your property tax you can get exempted have changed a little bit over the years. But currently, there's actually no requirement to even create jobs in order to get this extraordinarily generous subsidy. So there is a program that's ostensibly trying to bring manufacturing investment to the state. And what's really shown from the evidence is that this is typically investment that like would have occurred otherwise. The subsidy isn't what made it happen. And the companies are not even promising to create jobs. And actually, like the companies that have received the most ITEP subsidies over the years have had a net loss in jobs over the years of that giveaway. So really, this is an extraordinarily generous program for not a lot. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see this is just now zooming in on the LNG terminals operating or proposed in Calcasieu and Cameron parishes. And those two parishes alone would forego over $20 billion from all of these subsidies altogether over the next decade and a half if all of these terminals come online. $20 billion is an inconceivably large number, I know. And annually, you can see that peak in 2029, like at the most in 1 year, that could mean giving up $1.5 billion across the two parishes. And the reason that we're focusing on which terminals are already operating or under construction versus which are planned is just because with these terminals that are planned, which many of us are fighting, though we're fighting the expansions of the operating ones as well. With these terminals that are planned, if they never come online, they will never have property taxes to abate. So while we're talking about really big numbers, I hope that there's a little bit of hope in here too as well that, again, if these terminals never come to fruition, that money doesn't have to be given away, even though these agreements are, signed and sealed. So on the next slide, just another way to look at it is by parish. Calcasieu Parish in total over the next, 10 to 15 years is looking at giving up over $5 billion in tax revenue. Cameron Parish is at $15 billion. Again, that's just for LNG, but Cameron Parish is the top parish in the state in terms of ITEP giveaways, and a lot of that is because of these giant LNG companies. And Plaquemines Parish is about 830 million. And you can see kind of who the biggest offenders are here. In Calcasieu Parish, it's Woodside, Louisiana LNG, which many of us may know as Driftwood LNG. In Cameron Parish, it's Sabine Pass LNG, which is already operating but continuously looking to expand. In Plaquemines Parish, it's Plaquemines LNG. And another interesting way to look at this is in terms of the jobs that some of these developers do say that they're going to bring from these projects and with this ITEP subsidy. And just to take, Calcasieu Parish as an example, the subsidies granted to these developers are so large that even for the jobs that they're bringing, it amounts to the state, on behalf of Calcasieu Parish, giving away over $7 million for every job that the company promises to bring in. So even if those jobs come to fruition, even if they in fact hire locally, even if those jobs are permanent and good paying and good benefiting jobs, we're still talking about giving up, $8 million almost in lost revenue per job promised, which I think we could all envision a slightly more effective way or efficient way to attract jobs. Next slide. So how could this money be better spent? As I said, there's so many great ideas in all of the narrative around the report, but just to look at it from this way, this is based on Calcasieu Parishes. I'm just picking on Calcasieu because James is here. Calcasieu Parishes taxes as they were spent in the 2023 budget. So if Calcasieu Parish actually got that $5 billion instead of giving it away to LNG terminals, it probably would spend about 1.2 billion of it on law enforcement, 1.2 billion on schools, about 300 million on fire prevention, on libraries, on health services. And I think that really drives home the point that James made earlier, which is that like when these companies are talking about making a donation, even if it's I think Venture Global made a $6 million donation to local schools in Cameron Parish. Still, pennies on the dollar when we're talking about, well, if they had just, if all these companies had just paid their fair share of taxes, schools would have an additional $1.2 billion, which really is not an insubstantial sum in these areas. Next slide. We are going to move on to Texas. So we looked at a lot of areas in Texas, kind of going from north to south. We've got in Jefferson County, Port Arthur and Golden Pass LNG, which are proposed or under construction in an already extremely heavily industrialized area with poor health outcomes and poor pollution because of all that industry. In Brazoria County, we have Freeport LNG operating, and we're going to talk a little bit about that one, or I'll speak to that one in a moment. On the next slide, you'll see in the bottom left map, Corpus Christi LNG, another Cheniere project in San Patricio Nueces County that's getting subsidies. And then Beck will speak to later in the tip of Texas in Cameron County, the proposed Rio Grande LNG and Texas LNG terminals. So if we go to the next slide, there are two programs I want to touch on here really quickly, creatively named for their place in the Texas tax code. So Chapter 312, or the Property Tax Exemption Program, allows local governments to let companies off the hook for their property tax bill, up to 100% of it, up to all of it, for up to 10 years. And to give you a sense of scale, statewide and across all industries, in 2021, we're talking about $9 billion worth of property that is not paying property taxes. Now, it's a bit hard to quantify how much money each individual recipient of a tax break under this program is getting due to bad reporting requirements, but it's a lot. And then in Chapter 313, that's one we do have a bit more data and insight on. And this is a program under which independent school districts can cap the taxable value of property in their districts for up to 10 years. So let's say you're a company and between the value of the land you bought and what you plan to build on it, it's going to be, a $1 billion investment. The school district can say, okay, we're going to tax you as if it was only $30 million. So you can imagine, that means a much smaller tax bill than they would have had otherwise for 10 years. So this is a much bigger program. In 2021, $67 billion worth of property was off the tax rolls across school districts across the state. And just one not so fun fact that I want to throw in here is that this Chapter 313 program is actually expired. Like all of the agreements that we're going to talk about are still in effect, but they're no longer instituting new tax agreements under this program. And instead, last year, it was replaced by a new program that explicitly excludes renewable energy and storage projects from getting the subsidies. So just to drive home a point that Roddy made in the beginning, and I think James made as well, like, we're not talking about leveling the playing field here. We're talking about programs that are designed to subsidize polluting industries. And, this really just makes that clear. Okay, next slide. So Freeport LNG terminal that famously and unfortunately had an explosion in June 2022. Under Chapter 313, that's school district value limitation one, it's avoiding paying $447 million in taxes. And under Chapter 312, we have had partners like really dig into the numbers here. Better Brazoria and TCE found that Freeport LNG avoids paying an additional $149 million in property taxes. Next slide. So what we're looking at in Texas, if we just look at that Chapter 313 program, is 4 LNG terminals that get subsidized to the tune of $2.1 billion in taxes that they avoid paying. And similar to how we looked at it in Louisiana, again, What that means is even with the jobs that they promised to create under the program, we're talking about $43 million in subsidies that they are collectively granted for every job that they promised to create. And so I'm going to close on the next slide just by coming back to the title of the report, which is The People Always Pay. These tax exemption programs do not come for free. LNG developers get billions of dollars in tax breaks, and what do the people get? Well, they get the air pollution, the ecosystem damage, the climate crisis, and lose critical funds for social services. And that is part of the reason why I'm so excited to hear more from Becca about community organizing to actually block these tax abatements and reverse this trend. Thanks so much.
Allison, thank you so much. Again, I mean, Allison is so good at kind of breaking down these super complicated issues in a way that we can all understand them and use them. And that's what this report is for you to understand these corporate giveaways and then use that information to organize and build out your own narrative. Our next speaker is Becca. Before we go to Becca, I want to pause for a second. And James, I wanted to see if there's anything you wanted to come back in and add or build on from Allison's presentation.
Yeah, I just think those numbers are absolutely massive, and I think that is the piece that people should understand is these companies are not mom and pop companies. These are already billion-dollar companies that are extracting even more money out of the community. And she just, that one graphic that shows that huge graph of how much money it is just should upset everybody. It doesn't matter what political persuasion you come from. Like the corporations are robbing us, and enough is enough. I'll stop. Thanks.
Thank you, James. Thank you. Enough is enough. Says it all. Our next speaker, one of my favorite people to work with. I love Becca Hinoz. Known her for years. I've learned so much from Becca and just appreciate all the amazing work she's done. I said it earlier, death by 1,000 cuts. Becca's been fighting LNG terminals for, 10 years, more, I don't know. And she's been successful. Like there were at least 3 or 4 projects proposed for Brownsville, for the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, and one is completely closed up shop. Becca beat them down. There's still 2 that are still trying to move forward. I don't know how, but she's been fighting them every way possible. And part of that has been going after the tax abatements. And so really excited to hear from Becca and learn more about that strategy and how that they've approached that work over the years. So Becca, welcome. Turn it over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Great. Can you all hear me? Thumbs up. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Becca Hinojosa. My pronouns are she, her. I'm from the Rio Grande Valley. I live in Brownsville, Texas. I'm the co-founder of the South Texas Environmental Justice Network. And for folks who are not familiar with our community, Brownsville is a community on the US-Mexico border and the Gulf Coast. We're dealing with multiple injustices here in our community. We've been actively resisting 3 proposed LNG projects for over 10 years. Those projects are Rio Grande LNG, Texas LNG, and the Rio Bravo pipeline that would service gas to Rio Grande LNG. And we're also dealing with Elon Musk's SpaceX rocket launch facility, which SpaceX is just between 6 and 7 miles of the proposed LNG sites. They've already been dumping rocket debris on the LNG sites, and the federal government regulatory agencies have been keeping our community in the dark about the safety risks. Now, we've been resisting these toxic, polluting industries and doing everything we can to prevent LNG from coming to town for over 10 years. And that is because we have a diverse coalition of community members working together. Our organization, South Texas EJ Network, we bring together a coalition of youth, of workers with Border Workers United, a faith-led organization called Valley Interfaith. We work with the Carrizo Comacrudo tribe. We work with migrant rights groups such as South Texas Human Rights Center and other EJ groups that have all come together to urge Cameron County to reject massive tax breaks for the LNG industry. And, unfortunately, the Cameron County commissioners fail for these sales pitches from Rio Grande LNG and Texas LNG and approved, massive tax breaks that would amount to together nearly $400 million of taxes that they would avoid paying. So nearly $400 million of taxes that these LNG companies would rob from Cameron County. Okay. But these LNG companies also tried to get massive tax breaks from our school district, the Point Isabel School District, and they were not successful. And that is because residents here have been putting pressure on the school district, board members for many, many years. They lobbied them before they were elected into office to make sure that they would stay in opposition to these tax breaks. So I mentioned we are a diverse coalition of community members working together. For over a year, we were, doing everything we can to try to educate the county commissioners to vote no. We were meeting every week. We had presentations with student organizations. We collected postcards. There's a photo there of a child coloring a postcard to the county commissioners, asking for a clean future, a future clean of and free from LNG. Members of our coalition also met with the county commissioners. 2 of our county commissioners refused to meet with members of our coalition, and they kind of, were very pointed and rude about how they didn't want to meet with us during one of the county meetings, county commissioners court meetings. We also published our own report in English and Spanish that outlined all of the reasons why tax abatements are a bad idea. That included in our report all of the toxic pollution that would come from these LNG facilities. We highlighted, and we have pollution data that show that if LNG comes to town, they would be the biggest polluters in our community that is, low income, does not have good access to healthcare. In our report, we also noted that, we did the math, and we noted that essentially these tax breaks, we would be paying the salaries of these LNG employees. We also looked at the fine print of the tax abatement agreements, and we found that, Rio Grande LNG, for example, promised, 200 jobs, but then they said only, a percentage of those would be for a local hire. And then they defined a local hire as anyone that lives within a 100-mile radius for a minimum of 6 months. So that idea of local hires just kept shrinking and shrinking. And then it was only, 75 maybe permanent jobs for, over $300 million tax break. So just to show we were, being robbed by these tax breaks. We mobilized dozens, over almost 100 residents out to the Cameron County meeting when the commissioners were voting on a tax break for Texas LNG. And we asked for permission to present our own report to the county commissioners in this meeting. The county commissioners ignored our request and instead gave the LNG companies nearly an hour to present their own sales pitches to the community. So just to show how, things are really stacked against the community, how the commissioners wanted to meet with and hear from LNG officials more than their own constituents. And then county commissioners fell for these sales pitches and voted in favor of these tax abatements. So, I've been talking about how we've resisted, the LNG industry. We're also dealing with SpaceX. SpaceX applied for and got a 10-year tax abatement from Cameron County many, many years ago. That tax abatement is about to expire. And we are concerned that SpaceX will try to come back and reapply for another tax abatement from Cameron County, and we'll be waiting for them. We'll be ready to call them out to call out how SpaceX is, causing earthquakes in our community. It's causing people's homes to shake when they launch rockets, how people's home foundations are cracking, how SpaceX has been caught illegally dumping polluted water into the bay, how they're essentially already robbing our community and causing huge environmental destruction and an environmental disaster in the region. These LNG projects are not a done deal. We'll keep doing everything we can to, resist them and call them out to our public officials. Thank you all so much.
Becca, thank you so much for presenting and sharing your community story. I've been watching Becca and Becca's work for years, and to say that she's been fighting SpaceX and Elon Musk is like an understatement. She's taken on the richest man in the world and got him shook up a couple times. So, Becca, I just always admire your work and your very local approach. And I think you're an example for all of us in how we do our work. So thank you. Next up is Claire Dorner, another one of the authors of People Always Pay. Claire is Associate Director of Legislative and Administrative Affairs for the Sierra Club, and she's based in DC. Claire's going to talk about why people should care about tax abatements and how it relates to the current political chaos in Washington. I'm always grateful to Claire for keeping those of us who are not in Washington kind of apprised and up to date on what's happening in the halls of Congress and in the regulatory agencies that oversee or are supposed to oversee LNG and the other industries that impact frontline communities. So Claire, turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Roddy. So I'm going to basically put these state issues into context in terms of what's going on with federal policy, including some of Trump's executive orders and also the government budgeting process that we're seeing happen right now. Next slide, please. So LNG exports and what's going on in the Gulf Coast really impacts everyone. And I'm going to touch on why everyone across the US and beyond should really care about this issue. The Department of Energy, or DOE, is the agency that's required to determine whether or not LNG exports are in the public interest. That's called the public interest determination. They have to determine that for each project before that project can start exporting the gas. And to this day, the DOE has never rejected an LNG export application. We first started exporting LNG in the US in 2016, and since 2023 have become the world's largest exporter of LNG. So this is a very recent development for our country, and it's expanded very rapidly. When you look at already approved projects under construction and existing projects that are expanding after continuing operating, our capacity to export LNG is already set to double by 2028. So we're already the world's largest exporter, and that capacity is doubling in just a few years. And while this all has been happening very rapidly, we still have not fully gotten a full picture of understanding the negative impacts of LNG. More of that needs to be explored, and there's a lot that's unknown, but we also already do know a lot, which I can go deeper into. Next slide, please. Previous slide. But according to the DOE's most recent studies that were released in December of 2024, the more we export LNG, the higher energy bills become for manufacturers and consumers across the country. So at home, this means higher costs for the gas that we use to heat our homes and to cook, but it also means higher costs for general goods and services because manufacturers are also paying more for their gas costs. So it translates down to their products that we end up buying. Additionally, when we export our gas abroad, we've seen a direct correlation between energy prices rising because our domestic energy market becomes susceptible to the volatility of the international market. And we've seen this reported on in data, such as through the Energy Information Administration, We saw that total US spending on natural gas went up from $150 billion in 2021 to $269 billion in 2022 because of that international volatility associated with COVID-19 and also Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So our gas prices went up dramatically because of that international volatility. Beyond just price impacts, LNG is also not the low emissions alternative to coal that people have tried to claim it is. Peer-reviewed research shows that LNG exports are 33% worse for the climate in terms of their life cycle emissions than coal because they release lots of methane and have a lot of steps in the supply chain. Methane is incredibly important for us to reduce in order to meet our climate commitments because it has an 80 times higher warming potential in the atmosphere than CO2 just over a shorter period of time. So when we're thinking about our climate commitments over the next 20 to 50 years, it's almost more important to reduce methane than it even is to reduce CO2. Additionally, the most recent study from the DOE found that in almost all of the explored scenarios, LNG actually displaces and competes with the build out of renewable energy rather than displacing things like coal, which again, we know is potentially not even as dirty as LNG. All of this to say, LNG exports are certainly not in the public interest, and we believe that DOE should be finding that through their public interest determination. Next slide, please. So to touch on some of the executive orders that we've seen from the Trump administration since the inauguration on January 20th, we know that the Trump administration is pushing to increase LNG exports and fossil fuels of all kinds, despite evidence from the DOE itself that this is not in our best interest. Trump has released numerous executive orders propping up the fossil fuel industry and attacking climate resilient investments, such as the Unleashing American Energy Executive Order, which directs the Department of Energy to review LNG export applications as quickly as possible. And also the Energy Emergency Declaration, which claims that our energy capacity in this country is inadequate to meet our needs, despite the fact that right now the US is producing record levels of oil and gas, the highest levels in history. The order also directs the nation to produce more energy in order to lower costs, but wind and solar are not included in Trump's definition of energy in this executive order. And also, as I mentioned, the more we export LNG, the more costs will raise for consumers. And just to tie this back to a false promise that Trump has made, he has claimed that he will reduce energy costs for Americans by 50% within his first 18 months in office, which we know, based on all of his actions so far, is completely false and quite the opposite. So why would he do this if this seems so counterintuitive? The answer is very simple, but it's a dark truth. President Trump wants to protect his donors and CEOs with ties to the fossil fuel industry who either helped him get elected and or would profit from a deregulated, rapid fossil fuel expansion. Therefore, he's not paying attention to the public's best interests. He's really only paying attention to the best interests of the fossil fuel industry that has supported him before. Next slide, please. So this is not just happening at these tax subsidies are not just happening on the state and local level, like this report has detailed. It's also happening on the federal level and impacting us right now. Basically, Republicans and corporate polluters on all levels, local to national, are working together to cut community services and infrastructure, which forces hardworking taxpayers to subsidize the fossil fuel industry and provides tax breaks for billionaires who influence our politics to support their harmful agendas. We're seeing this right now on the federal level through the budget reconciliation process. This is the process that the majority or Republican Party uses to enact their agenda and pass legislation without needing a lot of broad minority or Democratic support, because it only requires a simple majority in the Senate, so only 51 votes to get this legislation through instead of the typical 60 votes it would require. Therefore, they don't need as much Democratic support. So both the Senate and House have released versions of their budget plans, and eventually the chambers will unite around one version of this budget plan, but it contains all sorts of different types of topics ranging from military spending, energy spending, immigration. And so for the House version that we've seen released so far, it includes $1.5 trillion in government spending cuts in order to pay for massive tax breaks for billionaires and corporations like the oil and gas industry. And for the Senate version, it's $4 billion in government spending cuts with a tax bill to come later in the year. That's why that bill has a much lower number in government spending cuts. But that tax bill would come later, which plans to cut even more funding to provide tax breaks for the wealthy. How do they plan to create so many spending cuts from the government in order to pay for this? The answer is by gutting programs like Medicaid, which 70 million Americans rely on, SNAP or food stamps, which 40 million Americans rely on, and many, many children rely on, and other critical programs and infrastructure like the critical investments from the Inflation Reduction Act that provide tens of thousands of jobs in both Democratic and Republican districts across the country. These federal budget proposals are going to lead to higher costs, worse air quality, slashed jobs, and reduced social services and support in order to benefit billionaires and fossil fuel companies. This is a pattern that absolutely needs to stop. Next slide, please. So you might be thinking that's a lot of bad information, really negative. What are we able to do? There are a few things that we're able to do even right now when Republicans have a majority in all three branches. Here's what Congress can do. They can speak up about the harms of tax abatements on all levels of government and support reports and frontline stories like this. They can also introduce messaging legislation. This is legislation that might not be able to pass now, but can promote awareness of the issues and can be reintroduced in a future Congress where we might have more power and actually be able to pass the legislation. They also can slow the legislative process by any means necessary, like the filibuster. We already saw Senate hold an all-night filibuster related to the federal funding freeze. And also they can use oversight through congressional research and hearings that they hold with targeted questions to fight back against any false narratives from the fossil fuel industry and the Trump administration about his actions and claims of putting Americans first. And an example of some congressional action that has pushed back against these harms of corporate subsidies is the End Polluter Welfare Act of 2024 from last Congress. And this is legislation that I and I'm sure many on this call would love to see passed in the future. It would close tax loopholes. It would eliminate corporate handouts to oil and gas and coal industries. And it would also save American taxpayers up to $170 billion over the next 10 years. And the bill also gained a lot of support from over 300 organizations and over 35 members of Congress so far. And if it's reintroduced as a messaging bill, that support can only increase. So that's kind of the lay of the land on the federal side and how it relates back to the state impacts of these subsidies. All of these programs from the local to the national level need to be challenged, and we need to stop this pattern of fossil fuel industry being able to influence our politics and fund their own agenda using our tax dollars. And I will pass it back to Roddy. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. As always, thank you so much for your analysis and keeping us up to date on the swirl and the mess that is Washington, D.C. right now. So thank you so much for that. We've got a lot of good questions in the chat box. Before we get to that, though, I want to talk to you about how to get involved. We've got a couple actions, ways that you can get involved in this. The first is seemingly tangential, but we've got a call to action. We need to take action on CP2 LNG. We have been fighting this project for years. Your comments in the past, the legal work, the advocacy, James's work, we've been able to slow this project down significantly. And part of that work was sending this back to FERC. FERC approved this project, but we were able to get it sent back to FERC to reanalyze some of the air pollution data. Seems really technical, but it's really important. This is how we slow these projects down. This is how we protect communities. So right now there's a comment period open, and we need comments on the record talking about air pollution and how bad CP2 would be for the communities around it. So please click on the link here, go to that page, and submit a comment. If you put your information in there, hit continue. We have kind of a form letter that we will send to FERC. We highly encourage, and it is really important, if you can, write your own comments. So personalize the letter. There's a blank spot in there for you to do that, and that that makes it all the more powerful for the work. So please,
Roddy, if I could. Oh, sorry, Roddy. If I just jump in for 1 second here on the CP2. I mean, this is the largest terminal that they want to build, and Secretary Granholm kind of mentioned it in her outgoing address. The life cycle emissions of this place alone is equal to 141 countries' entire yearly emissions. So it matters. It might not seem, where it's a little technical, but it is very important to get as many people to make a comment to let these regulators know that we cannot stand for any more of this. Sorry for interrupting, Roddy. I'll stop there.
No, James, you're always jump in. I really appreciate that context. Yeah, I mean, this is one of the biggest, worst LNG terminals projects. We got to stop this. We can't let it go forward. And so you're exactly right, James. And just I want to add a note there to the power of comments. Sometimes we don't think the agencies are listening. Sometimes we think that we're just yelling into the void, but we've been fighting the Seaport Oil Terminal off the coast of Freeport, Texas, for the last 5.5, 6 years. And in an earnings report recently, the CEO of Energy Partners said that our comments, we submitted 80,000 comments to that docket over a period of a couple of years. Becca was very involved in that work. And then a 60-page technical comment that slowed the company down so much that they lost their contracts, and they're still not moving forward. They have all of their permits, but they lost their contracts. And so the power of your comments, really, really important. So that's one action we're asking you to take tonight, and it's really important. When you take that action, we're going to follow up with you. And I think this is also a really important way for you to be engaged with an invite to a narrative training. So I think that storytelling and narrative work is where we can really have an impact right now. And so James and Becca and other frontline people are masters at telling their story and speaking for their community. And I think that all of us can need to be speaking out and being involved in changing the narrative that oil and gas is inevitable. And so we're offering this narrative training as a way to start telling our stories better and standing up and speaking with one voice. So take this action. We're going to follow up with you in a week or so with an invite to this narrative training. And we're going to start building a community around storytelling. And you may not live in an LNG community. You may not live around industry, but you have issues that are worth fighting for in your community. And we are all fighting for justice. And the more that we can speak with one voice and work together, the more powerful we will be. So before we close out, I want to kick it back to Claire for the Q&A. And so Claire, turn it over to you.
Yeah, so we've gotten some great questions in the chat. I'm going to read some of them out and see who would be best to answer them. This one is from Lewis. Is it the local politics that are letting these build-outs occur? Are they local workers? And if so, has the community dealt with what may feel like an internal betrayal? James or Becca, would that be something you can answer?
Yeah, I can definitely. It's definitely not for local workers, and local people feel betrayed. I know some shrimpers who have kids who went through school to do process plant technology and cannot get hired on with LNG. The honest answer is there's not that many jobs, permanent jobs. There's a lot of construction jobs, and there's not that many permanent jobs. And the piece about the local these tax abatements, and without getting into the weeds about it, have been a good old boy system by the Board of Industry and Commerce in Baton Rouge here in Louisiana, where they approve these without local input. We did have under the last governor the ability for local governments to have some input. But there's a wolf at the door knocking, and they're promising all this economic prosperity, and they just don't deliver. And so the bribes of turkeys at Thanksgiving and a new boat launch was able to get some people to believe that was worth giving up millions, well, billions of dollars.
Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, these LNG companies didn't have any other site in mind to build. They didn't need an incentive to try to come to the Port of Brownsville. The Cameron County commissioners threw away tax dollars for, these are meant to bring companies that we want that could help the community, and LNG very clearly does not help the community. They would be a disaster. And in fact, our community, we do need jobs. We're one of the most impoverished communities in the entire US, but we actually need good jobs that don't threaten our livelihoods, that don't rob us of tax dollars, that don't threaten us with flammable explosion. And our county commissioners have once again ignored us and sold us out, and are giving away our tax dollars to these LNG industries.
Thank you so much for those answers. Next question is from Tom. Why do these companies continue to get tax exemptions? How are they convincing local government officials to give them these exemptions? I think Becca and James, that would be helpful for you all to answer again.
Yeah, I'll go. I mean, it's the same situation. Like the ability of the local. We have what's called police juries. That is like the county commissioners. We also only have parishes, so they don't have the ability because it is the ITEP provision is a state board of industry and commerce, and so the one thing they do have control over is their own sales tax. And Cameron Parish, where these three facilities already exist and are operating, have no local sales tax. So when the companies and when the lobbyists and the trade groups say, oh, they invested $40 billion in this community. No, they bought $40 billion worth of stuff that they needed to run their operation. But nobody, if you didn't own the RV park or the gas station, or I think there's 3 grocery stores, all you received was pollution and traffic and noise. There was no benefit for the community, even from a sales tax perspective. So, yeah.
Yeah, and to add on to that, what are the perceived or actual benefits of 4 counties, and why are board members approving this for big companies? What are those perceived benefits that draw them into that?
One of the companies, Rio Grande LNG, is promising the county commissioners money for their own county commissioners' special projects, which we condemned that. We don't think the county commissioners should be receiving money for their own projects from the LNG company. That really sounds like a bribe. So that's one reason why the commissioners fell for it. The other thing is that, unfortunately, in Texas, the fossil fuel industry has become the status quo. County commissioners think that, growth means fossil fuel development, and they need to listen to our communities about what kind of growth we really want. The city of Port Isabel, South Padre Island, our coastal communities have been opposed to these LNG industries for years. They've sent letters to the county commissioners saying that they don't want these LNG industries, that they want instead support for ecotourism, for shrimping, for fishing. That's what fuels their local economy. That's what their livelihoods are dependent on. And the county commissioners, ignored their constituents.
Thank you, Becca and James. So next question, what percentage of overall expenses would these taxes cost these companies if they had to pay them? Would it bankrupt them? And what pathways for policy advocacy and change are there for folks? So that was a few different questions, I guess, but basically, would these companies even be able to pay the taxes, or would it bankrupt them?
They would definitely be able to still pay these taxes and still stuff their pockets with profits. I mean, that is the bottom line. What we've seen from Venture Global, who just released a IPO trying to get even more money, is their tax bill for the property would be $184 million. That's what is exempted. In the last 3 years, they have made $18 billion. And so, yeah, no, it wouldn't bankrupt them. They can easily afford it. The problem is they could not stuff more money into their already overstuffed pockets. And that is the bottom line there.
And actually, I think, Becca, your community is a great example of this, right? You've got tax abatements denied. Did the companies pack up and say, never mind, we're not building these projects? No, they're still doing it. Because as you said, this is where they want to site their properties.
Right. Yeah, I mean, Rio Grande LNG and Texas LNG applied for tax abatements from the school district. The school district said no, and then these LNG industries went to our county commissioners and got their tax abatements.
So speaking of commissioners, is it possible to get these county commissioners replaced with fair-minded or environmentally educated people? How are they appointed? What does that process look like?
Yeah, I mean, we have these police juries, and they are elected officials. And so the way to replace them is also to educate the public on what is actually being stolen from them, and that's part of what we have been doing. And it's not hard to you can look around. If you go down to Cameron Parish, you don't see economic prosperity. It's not there. It's what should be literally streets paved with gold is what we see as libraries that are shuttered, no hospital, and people having to travel an hour away to get to the grocery store because there's no incentive for rebuilding the grocery store that was down there after these storms.
So I'm going to kick this next question over to Roddy or Allison. What is the best thing I can do to share this report with my family?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is the whole point of the narrative training. This is the whole point of gathering tonight, is that we need to start talking about these issues, and it's very basic. I don't necessarily expect for you to share a long, somewhat dense report with everybody in your family and expect for them to read it, but we do have one-pagers, and we have them available in Spanish, and it's a matter of just starting conversations with your people, and they can be hard conversations. I know my family, I have people who voted one way and some of us voted the other way, and there are people on my block who are have signs for some politicians, and others on our block who have other signs. And I think what we've lost in our political discourse lately is the ability to come together and talk. And so, I hope that if you live in a community that is struggling with these LNG terminals, that you can use the report and actually organize and get involved in the county commissioners' races and get involved in local politics. If you live in Louisiana, like definitely go after ITAP and get involved in changing the system. If you live in, I think we had some folks in Hawaii and California, and there is a version of this conversation happening in your state and in your community. And we have to figure out how to talk to each other again, and how to build that discourse. This is not left and right issues. This is up and down issues. I think Claire actually said that the other day. And the rich are just going to get richer. What is the latest budget plan? Is that they're going to cut $1.5 trillion. Trillion. I keep doing that. Trillion. I can't even conceptualize these big numbers. $1.5 trillion out of social benefits, and give $4.5 trillion in tax cuts to the wealthy. And they don't need that. So this is an up and down issue, and we need to be coming together. And this report, I think, the way to share it is just by talking to your family members about these subsidies and government handouts. Allison, I'm sorry, I talked a lot. Go ahead.
Yeah. And excuse me. Sorry. And to answer one more question, which I think I'm going to be the best person to answer this. Isn't Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, representative of Louisiana? What's he saying about this? And also, how does this play into Project 2025? This is Project 2025 playing out in real time. Under the last administration, we were moving towards a path where the 2024 studies on LNG that the Department of Energy released were moving us towards hoping that we would start denying these projects and no longer export LNG to the same quantities. And we're no longer on that path, and we have to fight back differently at this point. So we see Project 2025 playing out because Trump does want to cut environmental regulations. He wants to expedite the permitting process for these projects, and he wants more fossil fuels of all types. So it's unfortunate, but again, as we've mentioned, there are ways to fight back, and narrative training and educating populations who are going to come back and vote, and also do more grassroots organizing in creative ways, is one of the best ways to go about this. And Mike Johnson, unfortunately, I'm sure he hasn't read our report, but even if he did, I'm sure he would ignore the facts mentioned in it because he is very much funded by the fossil fuel industry and therefore very much supportive of the fossil fuel industry. There are representatives in Texas and Louisiana that I'm able to meet with, and others are able to meet with regularly, that sign on to our letters opposing LNG exports and are supporters, but it can be kind of complicated. And so we are also thinking in our strategy through Sierra Club how to work towards getting more elected officials who understand these issues in office, and for those who are already in office to understand these issues as well. And that should, again, go down to even the level of those commissioners and elected officials on the smaller levels. And so I think that wraps up our time for questions, but thank you so much, everyone, for your questions and for the thoughtful answers that we got as well. I will pass it over to you, Roddy.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to all our speakers tonight. Allison, thanks for leading us in this effort. It's been a really great effort. And really this live stream is just the first part of the rollout. We are planning to do town hall events in Lake Charles in Southwest Louisiana. Talked to Beck about doing one in Brownsville. And so we're really going to take this on the road and invite industry, invite our community leaders and school board members and teachers to come to the table and talk about this stuff and argue about it and have debates. So this is just the first part of rolling out this report, and there's a lot more to come. Take the action, speak out against CP2, sign up for the narrative training. We're gonna really build a community here around storytelling and narrative work. We're going to be doing more of these live streams too, and we've got a couple other topics planned, so stay tuned. Y'all are amazing. Thank you for being with us for the last hour and 14 minutes. And again, thank you to Claire, Becca, Allison, James. Y'all are wonderful. And we'll see you next time. Oh, you know what? We got to thank Kathleen Melendez and Hillary Larson for working the back end. They are amazing people. All the emails and texts you get are from them, and they're the smart people who kind of pull together all the different strings here. So really appreciate their work, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.